very much the sense of the promise that we were having. You know, people would see Lawnmower Man and they'd have this vision of what VR is like. You pull the helmet over your head and you're in another world. But the reality of it was so much more sad and pathetic. The people that have actually tried the head-mount displays at the trade shows, it's like, okay, you're controlling something with your head, but there's no way you're believing that you're looking into a virtual world. It's like you've got a Wiimote attached to your head with Jello, and it's not a good experience. And there's a lot of reasons why it wasn't, but so I see this over and over in the sort of little VR communities. People will pop in and say, surely 20 years later now, I can just go out and buy that head mount that I wanted in the early 90s. Technology 20 years for a million times faster, it's gotta be there. And it wasn't. Last year, after we finished Rage, I treated myself. I said, I'm gonna go out and buy a new head mount on there. And I got one, and it was awful. It was just awful in a number of dimensions on there. It was not better than what I had remembered from previous years. It probably was a little bit better, but not nearly what you wanted. It still basically sucked. So I got that, and I decided, well, let's find out exactly why. So I started taking it apart, both literally and figuratively. I've got 5 head-mount displays in various pieces in my office on there, and I went to track the whole thing through. Well, what do you need? You need responsiveness, accurate imagery, and all this stuff. So you track it all down where you've got this path from, you want to be able to move a display, and then you want the image to update and do that very, very rapidly. Now, if you take random trade show head-mount display demo on there, the way you measure this is you take a high-speed camera, like a 240 or 480 frames per second camera, and you start filming, and then you go like, give the head mount a little tap there, and you count how many frames until the screen updates. Yep. That's the time for motion to photons coming out there. And most demos would have well over 100 milliseconds of delay, a tenth of a second. And if you move slowly, like you teach yourself to do in those old VR demos, you move slowly and deliberately, it's okay. But if you do one of these, you do that, and then the world comes back around after you. It's very problematic. And for a head mount, latency is more problematic than any other sort of gaming interface. If you've got a traditional console controller is pretty forgiving because you're doing this complicated action of you're positioning your thumb and then waiting a certain amount of time. So it's position plus time integration. And your body doesn't do that naturally. It's amazing how skilled people can be doing this unnatural action. Mouse and keyboard is one step removed from that because that's directly orienting the position of your hand to the position of your view. One step removed, and you can tell latency more, which is why serious pro players, they really like 120 hertz updates on there because it makes a difference.
I was about to say, what sort of acceptable latency can the brain handle, and still
So I have some numbers on this that I think the bogey is right about 20 milliseconds for motion to photons, because I can set up a display. The problem with all of these, everything I've got here is there's 60 hertz displays on there, and there really weren't 120 hertz head-mount displays available. I've actually built one where a company just started making driver boards available that can drive OLEDs at 120 hertz. They're $6,000. It's ridiculously expensive, but I really want to get this data point. That's never going to be consumer there, but there's actually no reason why Sony can't make these updated at 120 hertz. It would just be software changes for them. So I'm trying to convince them to do that, but I want these data points to be able to show this on here, because an existence proof is the most powerful way to win an argument. You can argue on why they should be so important, but it's much better to just show people, give them an A-B comparison on here. Some of the things that I have been able to do with in my R&D test bed, while I was still limited to 60 hertz on a fast OLED display, if I rendered 1,000 frames per second, so instead of going 60 and V-syncing, I just render as fast as I can, which is about 1,000 frames per second on a PC. So every couple dozen lines, I've got a new image. So it's got this, you've got little tear lines going around, but because there's not a lot of change between it, it's more like a rolling shutter. Yep. So it sort of works, but you still see the tear lines when you're doing these looks here. But if instead, if you tilt your head that way, they're not lined up for you on there, so they're decorrelated. And at that point, rendering with those parameters, it really looks like you're just tilting a frame in front of a stable world. And that's an important sort of benchmark milestone on there. I don't have that. Unfortunately, the horizontal clock syncs on the 120 hertz ones weren't good enough, and I had to send those back, and they didn't make it in time for this. I was hoping to show 3 axes of improvement, where if you take the Sony consumer unit as a baseline, it was actually a remarkably good value, where compared to the thing that I bought right after Rage on there, which was a few months before that was available, the Sony one is way better in almost every axis at half the price.
Which one did you try after Rage?
It was from a small integrator company on there. There are other consumer ones like the Musics that are pitched as personal TVs rather than, people think they might be virtual reality, but they're not. They're little images up there. The real problem with those is they advertise them as like, it's a 120-inch TV set 12 feet away. What kind of metric is that? It's a 26-degree horizontal field of view, which is like looking at the world through toilet paper tubes. It's not, there's no way you buy that as a virtual immersive reality on there. So fast update rate was one of those things I identified as very important. The other one was field of view, where the Sony unit is the first one that's touching on acceptable, where it has a 45-degree horizontal field of view. Most games today use somewhere between 60 and 80 degrees on there, so it's still quite a bit less, especially in terms of area, than what people are used to looking at, if you make it the actual optically correct value on there. But it's touching on usable, and I did some demos for people with the Sony headset, and it's got lots of latency in their TV processing stuff, lots of things that were not what I want out of there, but I still did some demos and showed some of the ZeniMax execs, and a lot of people left going, wow, this is really cool. I've got hot glued a sensor on there on the bottom of the